Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, January 1st, 2024. Happy New Year. Today we are going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election if Donald Trump chooses Nikki Haley as his vice presidential nominee. Now, this has come in a whole whirlwind of speculation over the past month around whether or not Donald Trump is actively considering Nikki Haley of being his vice president. And even then, that came to a point where Nikki Haley was then questioned on the campaign trail, would she rule out that she would be Donald Trump's vice president? And of course, as any politician would respond, she says that she's not running for second, but does not say explicitly that she is not going to be his vice president. Now, with a lot of Donald Trump's allies pushing away from the idea that Nikki Haley could be VP, this seems less of a likely option. But in today's video, we are going to be exploring the impact of a decision like this one on the general election in terms of an overall net positive or a net negative that might sort of give an idea as to why Donald Trump in the first place might even be considering Nikki Haley to be his vice president. Now, this would be not too much of an unorthodox pick. He chose her to be the UN ambassador during his administration and has had a very long working relationship with her. Most recently, too, fueling this speculation is that when Donald Trump was then pressed by members of the conservative media on a talk show as to whether or not he would say explicitly that Nikki Haley, someone he often refers to as Bird Brain on Truth Social and has attacked vehemently over the past couple of months, whether he would not consider her for VP, he, similar to Nikki Haley, did not give a direct answer to that and said he's not ruling anything out, stating that he believes that he will make the right choice and that he's not looking at it from an optics perspective, that he's not choosing a woman, he's not choosing a woman of color just to choose a woman of color, all of the things that he would like to say to pull back from the idea that he has any type of affinity-related thinking on this decision, but more so saying that he has always had a strong working relationship with Nikki Haley and that he's not ruling anything out. And so that brings us to this video on the 1st of 2024, because personally, too, I think Nikki Haley could very well be tapped to be vice president. Despite Donald Trump Jr.'s objections, many of his allies saying absolutely no way should Nikki Haley ever be vice president, I think Nikki Haley provides something to Donald Trump that he needs desperately, and that's electability. Donald Trump has been faced with an insurmountable task of winning in an election when voters rejected him 4 years prior. This isn't a circumstance of the 2016 election and Donald Trump running for re-election. This is a circumstance of Donald Trump running for re-election after, in many people's eyes, actively trying to overturn the last one. So in today's video, as I've said multiple times, this is a Biden-Harris, Trump-Haley situation and matchup that will be very, very interesting. So, of course, on our map here, we are going to start off by characterizing all of the states that Donald Trump won in the last election and Joe Biden won in the last election that were considered to be safe, that are still safe in 2024. This means states where we generally have an idea, without a doubt at least, about which party is going to win them. States like Idaho, Wyoming are safe Republican states, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, etc. These are all states where we have no reason to believe they are going to the opposite party after sometimes decades of voting for one political party. And so right now, we're still characterizing all of those states. It brings us to around 181 electoral votes for Joe Biden, about 125 for Donald Trump, and that leaves us with around 232 electoral votes in the toss-up column, or at least less safe for either side of the aisle, because they're not all going to be toss-ups, and some of them won't even be deemed competitive by many major pundits. The margins will just be inherently more competitive than others. And so on this map, you have a huge chunk that is yet to be characterized from different regions across the country. Nikki Haley, for a bit of background, used to be the governor of the state of South Carolina, so keep that in mind. So she's been involved in electoral politics for quite some time. Definitely a big name when it comes down to the GOP primary right now. She's not doing super well. I think that's a huge reason why this is even being speculated that somebody who is actively running for president could be considered for vice president, because the numbers are not too hot on the GOP side. She's tied with Ron DeSantis right now. I'm actually going to be talking about that tomorrow, but this is the national numbers today. She's tied with Ron DeSantis, but guess where they're tied at? 11%. Nothing super impressive, but still a big name when it comes down to that, because that's what we talk about, and we are so focused on this primary election. But she also, just again, provides this level of electability largely to, not because of her performance in the GOP primary, that doesn't really add anything, it is more about her performance in the general election, or supposed performance, according to polling numbers that we currently have. Right now, Nikki Haley defeats Joe Biden by a margin of around 5 points nationwide. That's in contrast with Donald Trump winning by 2.4 nationwide, and Ron DeSantis losing by 0.2. And so the general election numbers look the strongest for Nikki Haley. Another reason as to why Donald Trump could very well be considering her to be vice president. And history tells us that the vice presidential spot usually doesn't matter. Historically speaking, it hasn't always mattered. For one instance, 2012, Paul Ryan was supposed to make Wisconsin significantly more competitive. That didn't happen. In 2016, Tim Kaine was brought onto the Clinton ticket largely because he would carry the state of Virginia with him. In a sense, he did, but still it was a state that Democrats reasonably could have been able to win, but beyond that, the electability simply didn't matter. In 2020, Biden versus Trump wasn't about Harris and Pence, it was about Biden and Trump, and people didn't look much far beyond that. But now that we're in a circumstance where voters are being faced with an option about two candidates that they simply do not like, and neither side of the aisle is willing to have people propped up who do not make a name for themselves, and Kamala Harris certainly has, not only over the past 3 years of the administration, but again, she was a rising star in the Democratic Party. At one point in time, was running for president herself. The safe pick in Hillary Clinton's eyes was Tim Kaine. This time for Joe Biden in 2020, Kamala Harris wasn't necessarily the safe pick, but people really didn't put much thought into it outside of the Democratic primary. When Joe Biden made the commitment to choosing a woman as his vice president, that was the story, and then Kamala Harris was chosen, and that was the big deal. And, we had our first woman of color as president, or as vice president, and in line, to run for president 4 years, 8 years down the line, whatever it might be. But there wasn't as much conversation about Harris versus Pence. People weren't voting on Harris versus Pence. I think this time around, Nikki Haley will provide something that has not been traditional to presidential candidates in the past, and that is a revitalized look at a presidential ticket. Because as much as we say vice presidents don't matter, go back to 2008 and tell John McCain that Sarah Palin had no impact on his general election performance, because it absolutely did. And what that tells us is that maybe not in most cases. I don't think Pence had an impact. I don't think that Kaine had an impact, at least not beyond a marginal point. An improvement in Virginia, an improvement in Indiana, big whoop. But this time around, as we saw in 2008 and as we see now, individualized elections, where there can be candidates at the top of the ticket that are lackluster and viewed as such in terms of their approval. Kamala Harris is unfavored. Donald Trump is unfavored, right? Joe Biden is unfavored. The only one who really isn't is Nikki Haley, and that's why she does so well nationwide. And so that is going to be at the fundamental backing of my thinking and my thought process around this election. And I think I've started to build this idea and this understanding that I hope you get from this, that Nikki Haley only adds to the ticket, which is why I think Democrats are afraid of her not only as a presidential contender, but potentially as a vice presidential contender too. Because based on where the current polling numbers are, Donald Trump is set to win a lot of the states that he won in 2024. In my last prediction, I already characterized a number of states as likely red and likely blue. And I think Nikki Haley actually reduces the Democratic Party's chances in a number of states and margins and benefits because she is a more electable vice president and provides a huge juxtaposition to Donald Trump. Voters don't like Biden, they don't like Harris, they don't like Trump for some reason, and I think that needs something that Democrats and Republicans need to more thoroughly study and understand. Nikki Haley doesn't have an unfavorability rating as high as theirs. And while that could be due to the fact that many people simply don't know who she is, I can promise you this. Somebody who is more electable in statewide and national level polling isn't doing that simply because people don't know who they are. Part of the reason why you see polls that are in the low 30s or high 30s and you see, impacts and improvements and sways of candidates moving vastly different from the rest of the field is because that deals with candidates that are no names. People don't really build much of an idea around them or know what they stand for. But Nikki Haley has been so nationalized enough that we can put her in comparison to people like Biden and Trump. And so Nikki Haley, around 45% of registered voters have an unfavorable view of her. But that's compared to 55 for Trump, 58 for Biden, right? So that's bad news for the Democratic Party. And then for Kamala Harris, the numbers actually get worse. Around 56% have an unfavorable view of Kamala Harris nationwide. So when I look at those numbers, I see Nikki Haley's 45% as an astounding victory for her. And so I think that matters too. I think we will look at that and, call into question whether or not she is liked. And I think the answer will be yes. The same way Biden was liked back in 2020, but is no longer now that he's serving out his full term. And so looking at the remainder of this electoral map, we do see improvements, I think, for Donald Trump relative to what my last prediction was, because Nikki Haley is a candidate who adds. I can imagine there are candidates who do not add. People like Kristi Noem from South Dakota, I think if she gets on the ticket, Trump performs just as well or potentially worse than he did. I don't think she brings in any type of huge juxtaposition. Nikki Haley's positions on abortion, on healthcare, on a bunch of different topics that I think she talks about correctly while standing for the same things that Donald Trump does, maybe besides a national abortion ban, which even then Donald Trump hasn't outright supported, but has very much touted that he overturned Roe v. Wade. There are reasons to believe that Nikki Haley could navigate the VP space in a way that makes her seem very presidential and makes her seem like a huge temperament to Donald Trump's thinking, Donald Trump's governance, Donald Trump's presidency. Mike Pence did that slightly at the VP debates. It wasn't the biggest thing people were voting on. I think Nikki Haley, for lack of a better comparison in the 21st century, for a huge, pick. Sarah Palin was that in 2008. Paul Ryan wasn't really much in 2012. Mike Pence wasn't really much in 2016. Dick Cheney was a safe choice in 2000. Sarah Palin was when Republicans really made a huge choice. They made a decision to choose a governor that nobody knew, wasn't running for president, but they thought provided electability. They obviously were wrong. But Nikki Haley is not a no-name governor. She is a Republican candidate who has gone through this cycle and has made a name for herself, made voters like her more than they have other candidates. Some polls even have her up 17 points nationally, which is crazy to think about. Not going to happen, but crazy to think about. That show that voters do respond positively to her. That in the same polls that show Trump winning by 1 or losing by 2, Haley's up by 4, by 5, by 6, by 17. That's crazy to think about, but something that Republicans absolutely do have in their mind when they're thinking about the 2024 election. And so with that knowledge, I take the states that I already thought Trump was going to win based on where we are presently. And I think he would do better in states like Arizona and states like Georgia that are looking for a return to Romney-McCain-esque conservatism, that Nikki Haley provides that while tempering the Trump base by having Trump at the top of the ticket. And at the end of the day, the majority of voters will not be voting on the VP spot, but a lot of independents who pay close attention that could make up for tens of thousands of voters, and do make up actually for tens of thousands of voters. The well-informed voter is a well-active voter, and one that can be swayed back and forth. And what you saw in 2016 is that they swayed towards Trump. What you saw in 2020 was that they swayed towards Biden. With Nikki Haley as vice president, I think they go back to the GOP if Donald Trump wasn't already bringing them there. And so Wisconsin and Pennsylvania already states that I said Donald Trump was going to win. I think in this matchup, he wins re-election. But I think he does even better. I think he takes states like Michigan and wins them over slightly more. Not a massive, not a major improvement, but enough to say that I think he does better enough that he's able to shift slightly over into winning these states. I still think Democrats are going to be able to win states like Maine. They're still going to be, likely blue. States like Minnesota, I still think will hold out strong for Joe Biden. But forget it about winning the election based off the way that things currently stand. And forget it, too, about whether or not the VP pick will tank Donald Trump, because Nikki Haley certainly will not. And so where we are right now is Joe Biden, I still think, wins the state of New Hampshire narrowly. I think it gets down to as close as it was back in 2016. Michigan flips red, though. That was a different change. It is a different change from my last video. Nevada, too, I think Donald Trump could win there. I think, again, Nikki Haley, although is not someone that I think Donald Trump would love to run with, is someone that I think, politically speaking, he should run with. At least based on numbers like these. Because it isn't just vibes. It isn't just this idea of Nikki Haley serving as this vice presidential pick for Donald Trump as a huge juxtaposition. The first woman of color chosen by the Republican Party. Somebody who's made a major name for herself this election cycle by tackling Donald Trump head on in the primary process. That's not something that I think would please many of the inner circle around Trump. But you know who it would please? Independent voters that want Haley to be at the presidential spot, but will settle for her if she's at the vice presidential spot. But they're not going to listen to her if she's on the campaign trail as a surrogate for a Trump Nome ticket, for a Trump Lake ticket, for a Trump whatever ticket if that ticket isn't adding anything to the actual White House further than just an influential role. The vice presidential spot is a sacred one for Donald Trump, because I do think, unlike past elections, similar to 2008 and similar to elections where the VP has made an impact, I think this one trumps all, for lack of a better term. And I think right now, Donald Trump, because he is so unpopular, because Biden is so unpopular, because Harris is so unpopular, based on opinion polls, we look at that and say that there is an opportunity for somebody to come into here who is likable, who is liked, who is known, and that someone is Nikki Haley. It's not Chris Christie. It's not Ron DeSantis. It's certainly not Vivek Ramaswamy. Nikki Haley is the only Republican above the fray here who does well poll after poll after poll amongst independent focus group, research group, whatever it might be. And although political pundits in the past have said VP spots don't always matter, they absolutely do this time. And I genuinely believe Nikki Haley is on that ticket. The election becomes significantly harder for Democrats. Not unwinnable, but significantly harder because she is likable. She is liked by independent voters. And like I said about a few minutes ago, she stands for everything that Republicans do. But she talks about it in a way that sways voters in the independent column to make her seem centrist, to make her seem moderate. And I think recent comments around the Don't Say Gay bill on the debate stage with Ron DeSantis around slavery are going to be things that will be brought up against Nikki Haley. But if she maintains her level-headedness that she has, besides those situations, she could very well win back the narrative between now and November 2024 and win the election alongside Donald Trump. The question is, will she take the VP spot or want to run in 2028, or will Donald Trump himself back out of the idea of choosing her altogether? So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist from our 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.